Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Guy Redmill, and I'm helping out Simon Pearson from World Telecom Labs, who is your presenter today. Before we begin, and before I hand over to Simon, I should like to mention a couple of things, please. Firstly, we really encourage questions. We love to hear from you. We love to hear from people who are out in the field or who have different experiences. So if you do have questions, please do use the question tab in the Go To Webinar control panel. You can simply type in there and address them either to everybody or just to the presenters. Feel free to type when you want. We will be pausing in the middle to perhaps go through any questions that have emerged then, rather than, as is traditional, waiting to the end, although we will have a Q&A session at the end for those who wish to reserve their questions until then. The slides that you're going to see will be shared with you after the event, so you'll be able to review those in your own time if you're unable to stay with us for the full duration of the session. And then finally, Simon will be adding some words about some related activities in which WTL is engaged, in particular some research that we're conducting together to look at how connectivity can be extended into new environments. So without further ado, I should like to hand you over to Simon, who has compiled this presentation from the encounters and experiences he's had, and he's going to share with you some hopefully valuable information. Thanks, Simon.
Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks. Thanks to Guy for the introduction. Okay, so just as Guy says, the idea is to share some information about LTE networks and to talk about some of the experiences we've had. We're an equipment vendor, we're an integrator, we deliver solutions around the world, and increasingly that's involving LTE networks. So the agenda, I want to talk a bit about the challenges, I want to talk about some of the myths in and around LTE, how we deal with those, and then I want to spend some time talking about the different use cases, the different possibilities, the ROI considerations around that. So I'm trying to keep it practical. I don't want it to get too academic, theoretical into the kind of ITU end of things. Just really talk about what we're finding in the field, and that's why I'd really like questions and contributions as we go, if you feel like doing that. So I talk about the challenges, and for us the big challenge that got us into this in the first place is connecting the unconnected, something we feel very strongly about. We're involved in projects all around the world where we're trying to do that. In the past, that's been a lot to do with 2G and GSM, but now, in order to get the higher speeds, the broadband up, we're increasingly turning to LTE to do that. So that's what I feel we need to do. Why hasn't it happened more already? Well, it's to do with what's perceived to be the cost, the ROI, the cost of ownership, and that's some of what I want to share with you today. I think we've addressed a number of those things, and I think that it's going to be interesting to see how we've done some of that. Okay, so here is something in talking to people, a set of the myths that I think have grown up around LTE, and I'm going to go through and talk about some of those because I think they expose some of the false thinking and some of the ways life has changed, so these myths are not necessarily true. So my first one is that sounds a bit of a strange one, but that LTE means 4G and 4G means mobile operators delivering mobile services to fancy smartphones. Now, that's not true at all. That's, I think, where a lot of the publicity comes from. It's a lot of where the marketing push comes, but it's not really the way we see LTE and how it's most usefully being deployed. And it's not really the case I'm going to concentrate on here. So it's an enabler. LTE is an enabler for high-speed data networks, which happens to be wireless. So perhaps think of it as more like an ADSL replacement, say. So it's it's obviously a way of delivering a service, delivering a better data experience, and that can mean for mobile devices, but it can also mean for residential, for business users, just sitting at their desk, sitting in their homes. So don't get drawn into that. As I say here, you need to disconnect LTE from some presumption about the devices that are going to use it. You don't need a high penetration of top-end smartphones to deliver the benefits we're talking about here. So I think that's an absolutely key myth that you've got to deal with early on. Otherwise, your whole thinking is incorrect about how this works. Whoops, I've gone too far. Right. So that kind of leads to my second point, that LTE is only for the big guys. It's only for the major MNOs. What's it got to do with me? It's just not. It's not true. Again, think of it as a way of delivering a decent broadband service, a reliable IP service with good QoS, good quality of service. And then I think it becomes clearer how this can be used and who it applies to. So I say delivering data access for all. I suppose what I might say is it delivers data access by all sorts of organizations. So the ways of delivering this, I don't know if you're in mobile world in Barcelona looking around, there's such a lot of LTE, CPE, customer premise equipment available now. All the major device vendors that you're used to, sort of Cisco, Zyxel, TP-Link, all those kind of guys who you're used to seeing offering wireless access and routers and all that kind of stuff. They are all offering LTE access equipment. There's a real big range, indoor stuff, outdoor stuff, for enterprises, for homes, sort of funky kind of decorating, fancy decor versions for modern homes. It really is all out there, and anybody could be deploying that. It really doesn't have to be just an MNO. And repeating my point, it's fixed wireless coverage. Yes, it can be mobility, but it's not. It really isn't exclusively mobility. It isn't tied to that. So I think, and what we at WTL are seeing, is this means it's drawing attention from a much broader range of service providers. It isn't. I repeat, it isn't just the major, the four big MNOs in a country. It's the fixed providers. It's ISPs. It's regional operators. It's it can be governmental, regional councils, education people. It's quite a widespread community. So keep that in mind as well. Right. But having said that, there is an issue which we have to face, and I think this is partly why in some cases people do associate it with MNOs, and that's around spectrum. The reason I think it's been associated with MNOs is that there is a license question, there is a spectrum question, but you've got to look behind the scenes a little bit. That, as I say here, with LTE, the rules are different. well, for a start, there is just much more spectrum available. You have multiple different frequencies. I should say this whole section is very, very variable country by country. So it's difficult to there are some of the things I say that will not apply in particular countries. I appreciate that. But I think the general points are still valid. There is so much more spectrum available. You have multiple different frequency bands. You have different channels within the different bands. And that's clearly why it's being used. That's why it's being seen as a breakthrough, and why it's able to deliver much better data performance. So because there's much more of it, it means you don't only have to have a very high priced auction to just a very few number of players. That's why if the regulator and the government choose, they can be much, much smarter about how this is distributed. So just a couple of points. You could make it regional. I've seen that done. So you don't necessarily give a single license that covers the entire country. It can be differentiated, and this I think is the real interesting area. So I've seen some regulators taking the stance that they are deliberately going to break up the spectrum allocation. They're deliberately going to ensure that other players than the major operators get access. And that's going to encourage competition. It's going to encourage innovation. In some cases, people have reserved frequency for community type, non-profit organizations. So, you know, if the major operator says, oh, well, it's not worth us giving coverage in that area, well, let somebody else do it. You reserve some spectrum for them to do that. And that, I think, because it's a whole new initiative. You know, people are thinking about these licensing issues now, not 10 or 15 years ago. Then there's room for some more creative thinking. But the other point is, you know, we've had the experience of what happens if you just let it fall into a few hands. So, you know, it is a finite resource, and wherever you are, I don't know, not everybody has the ability to lobby their regulator, but there are models in other countries where people have been really quite imaginative about how they're going to use this spectrum. It is a country asset, and you must make sure it's wisely used. Don't let somebody just sit on it. So that's my point there. Yes, you can get different players in, but there does need to be some support from the regulator to allow that to happen. Right. There's an assumption that because LTE is the latest and greatest, because it's higher performance than what went before, then obviously it's going to have a huge price ticket, and it's going to be really difficult to get into. That may have been true at the very beginning, but we and people like us at WTL, we've really come in to try and give a lower point of entry, much more scalable. We use a whole series of small cells and other technology that allows us to build from a much smaller starting point. So you're not going to need millions of dollars to just get in the game. That coupled with my previous points is why we're seeing a much broader range of people trying to get in here and trying to offer imaginative services, more so than you saw, for example, when 3G licenses started being used. Now, the part of the myth comes from the point that the typical equipment profile has been skewed towards the highest densities, putting equipment in the big cities, creaming off the most valuable subscribers. So we're trying to say, no, you don't have to go for the high density. You can use smaller, lighter, lower cost base stations, if you like, to pick up the business and to make sure that you can still get an ROI without being only in the business district of the main city. So, and we do things like using renewable power, optimized backhaul, and other techniques so that the OPEX is also low, because it's all very well having a lower capital cost of the equipment in the first place, but you've got to also, to get an ROI, you've got to be able to keep the OPEX down as well. Okay, now this might seem odd based on what I've just said. One of the myths is that LTE is to deliver data only, and therefore that's all you can charge for. Now, in a sense, yes, I suppose it is data only, but I think what people mean when they say, oh, it's data only, they mean it's internet access only. The only thing you could charge for, therefore, is a kind of all-you-can-eat broadband contract, monthly contract, or something like that. And that can be difficult to justify the investment and how you're going to get your payback. But not just, I think operators around the world, if you ask them, you will find that voice and SMS still actually pay the bills. It's kind of a bizarre position, but it's still true. 60%, I think, of revenues of operators around the world still come from voice. You wouldn't think it, it doesn't get a great deal of attention, but it is the thing that people are happy to pay per minute for. So you've got to concentrate on that. And we have ways of making sure that can happen, just treating the LTE as a nice, reliable IP connection, a nice pipe, if you like, a good quality of service. And over that, we have different CPE. We have a voice over IP app for phones and tablets and PCs and so forth, client, which can very nicely give you a voice service to run over the LTE and allow you to charge for. And then beyond that, I know these are obviously these things are data based, but in terms of where you get your revenue from, they're slightly different. Wi-Fi hotspots, money transfer we support in some places, information lines. We've seen some nice examples of IoT, Internet of Things, which all then they take you beyond just pure all-you-can-eat monthly data contracts. That's really my point there. Okay. Now, the final myth I'm going to mention is this idea that VoLTE, voice over LTE, is scarily complex. Now, in a way, that there is some truth to that. There are the classical deployments by the big operators have got quite a lot of technical complexity in them. They've often got a costly an IMS core. They've got quite heavy OSS, BSS systems managing them. But we've taken a bit of a step around that and said, look, the VoIP from operators is a very well established technology. Why are you making it so complicated? And we've really borrowed from our existing world of supplying VoIP networks, VoIP switching, gateways, and so on, billing, what have you, to operators for the last 10 or more years. And we've said, well, we can adopt an awful lot of that, put it over an LTE underlying infrastructure, and you get a very effective, very usable service, which is much, much easier and quicker to roll out and start to earn revenue from. And some of the assets that we've got that really help in that area that you would need to look for if you're proposing to do something similar. You want a nice scalable system. and key to turning it into a proper service that you can earn money from, of course, is the provisioning and the billing. And we have a product, our Vivada View, which enables people to do that. And we found that is the key. It's being able to create services and of course bill for them. All right. So just to remind ourselves of the challenge we're talking about here. This is from a GSMA report from late 2016. I don't think the figures have changed particularly there. What it's showing here is the gap between different parts of the world. So across the bottom, you can see what proportion of the population has access to 4G or LTE services, and then up the vertical, it shows you what percentage of the people have actually adopted it yet. So you can see the pattern. North America, virtually all the population is covered, and about 60% of them are already adopting. Okay, take it to the other side. In Africa, 20% are covered, and I don't know, that looks like 2 or 3% are actually adopting it at the moment. And other territories are along that spectrum. Now, one of the key reasons for that is that in the North American population is wealthier, right? We understand that, but they are more proportionally, they are much more urban dwellers, so therefore they are easier to provide coverage for. Africa is still the least urbanized of the continents, and so that contributes as well. And this is in terms of Africa, I said, well, this is a pretty bad graph, and the news is, according to GSMA, it's going to get worse. The gap is going to widen. So that is that's bad news. Bad news there. So that's why we feel that different approaches are needed. Why we feel a small cell approach, a scalable approach, is needed. And here are a couple of the business models that we have been experiencing. And please, if anybody has comments on them, do put a question in or use the chat to say so. Right. First is the obvious one. It's extending an existing LTE network. So this, I think you would. This is probably something already owned by an MNO, or the frequency is owned by the spectrum is owned by the MNO, and we're allowing them or encouraging them to get deeper into the country, create these kind of islands of LTE coverage. We have some interesting technology in the way of like backhaul optimization, which will enable that to be done nice and cost effectively. So, excuse me. So we're using the small cells to give us a low capex, and then we're using different power options like solar and backhaul optimization to reduce the OPEX. And if you drop both of those, the capex and the OPEX, then you get the possibility to really reshape the financial options here, and the picture becomes a bit different, and regions that were earlier not possible to reach become reachable. Okay. The standalone network. This is interesting because we've been able to lower the cost of entry. Then we are able to allow people, as I said, ISPs, regional operators, fixed line operators, to get their feet into the water and offer a network that does not have the huge costs the multi-million dollar investments that you might think. And we can do this this becomes a fully contained, fully operational network with its own billing system, its own provisioning, its own management. And one of the attractions for me of this is it allows the operator to give a blend of services to suit their local market. So if they have good ideas that will suit where they live, then they can offer those. They're not trying to do the same service across an entire country, which can be a bit restrictive, I think. And then the last one I want to talk about is something we believe in quite strongly, and that is this infrastructure as a service. You've probably all seen that a lot of operators have gone to a kind of no capex model where they want a third party to create the infrastructure, and then the operator will pay for the use of that. And you get a multi-tenancy approach where the tower companies were probably the first example of this. So rather than the operator owning all their own towers, they lease space on one, or they lease time on one from an independent infrastructure company. We see lots of that happening in the LTE world for obvious reasons. It allows you to get into the market much more cheaply, and the burden doesn't all fall on one operator. Now, I said this is an area we're pretty interested in, and we have a survey running at the moment about infrastructure as a service, how acceptable it is, where it's popular, why it's popular, why it hasn't become even more popular. So I'll send out a link to that survey after today's webinar, and if you wouldn't mind, if any of you have got views or feel motivated to complete the survey, that would be good. There's a prize for one of the people who completes it, so that, there's a little bit of bribery to get you to get involved. So please, we'll send that out afterwards. Do fill it in, because as I say, IAS is we think is an important topic of how better coverage is going to happen over the next couple of years. Right. I was thinking we would have if there are any questions at this point, we'd sweep a couple of them up. I don't see any. Guy, do you?
No, I can't see any either, Simon. I don't know whether that's because they're not coming through, but perhaps I'll alert you should I see one, and then we can do it that way. Otherwise, okay, we can proceed to go through the use cases, which may, in fact, elicit more questions.
Okay, will do. Right, so now let's, having talked about, what the sort of cases are for how this might be used. Let's look at some practicalities. So this is my case that I was talking about earlier. This is where we are essentially doing an ADSL replacement. Okay, so the eNode B, that's the LTE radio. So that's covering its immediate vicinity. It'll have a range of a couple of kilometers probably, and within that you're offering the equivalent to the sort of wired broadband experience that people in the West and in the cities are used to. It isn't wired, of course, so there will have to be a backhaul of some kind from the radio in the eNode B. We'll optimize that to make the maximum use of it. Backhaul could be anything from, could be fiber if you're lucky, could be satellite if you're less lucky, can be micro, depends on the particular geography and the conditions where you are. You come back to the core, and from there we're able to give the internet access and do the billing and provisioning to make sure that happens. So it gives access to a whole range of devices, and as I say, it's high-speed broadband access, but without the fixed infrastructure. Right, moving that on a little bit. What I've added here is I've put our VoIP app, our client, out with the smartphone users or on PCs, and this is giving what I described earlier as a kind of an OTT voice service running over this nice, reliable IP connection over this with a good QoS, so we make sure we give a very good voice quality. We optimize the backhaul so that the voice aspect doesn't take up too much of your valuable bandwidth. And then when we get to the central site, we've got a breakout, a voice termination to the mobile operators of the country, the fixed operators, international if you want, and also obviously that, as before, you've got the data traffic going off to the internet, and we're billing and provisioning all of that from a central point, and we're giving a nice sort of converged billing for that. Okay, so I think the next slide we'll come to a couple of the specifics of what you can cover. So I guess the point to pick up here is how we're avoiding the cost of the last mile. So you're able to reach these clients without having to dig up the street or string cables along between poles or something like that. And that obviously is a huge disproportionate part of the cost and makes it difficult to reach people. So this is kind of what you're doing, I suppose. This is quite often, LTE is quite often positioned as a WiMAX replacement. And these are, again, I've got to be careful that there is not one set of rules for LTE network design. It is a bit of an art. There are different frequencies behave differently. Obviously you have to pay attention very, very much to the local environment, the local geography. But typically what we see with the higher frequency radios, the higher frequency E-node Bs, is up in the top left here you've got an omni antenna that will cover a radius of around about 2 kilometers. That's assuming there are not a lot of high-rise buildings and that the area is not excessively hilly or very heavily covered with vegetation. On the other hand, going to the top right, if you're looking to cover a longer area, perhaps typically this is used along roads where development is sort of stretched out along a street, along a road, then you focus the radio beam, you use sectoral antennas, and that will increase your coverage to more like 4 kilometers. And because this is a digital service, you don't really get a fading of the service. It's kind of, if you're used to digital radio, you don't get crackling as you get further away. You just lose service. So it's kind of, you've either got it or you haven't. So that's, I mean, that's good. It makes the installation a bit easier and a bit more manageable, I think. So down in the bottom left, what the performance you can expect from a single carrier of a single frequency of LTE is a download of 95 meg, an upload of 10, and that is typically shared between 64 users. If you want to do more than that, you have to double the you have to increase the number of carriers, essentially put more radios in is what it's in simple terms is what it amounts to. Now, the way you go and put that together in a network absolutely depends on what your situation is. I've shown a couple of examples here, but these are just, again, they're just simple cases. So the business center, you're going to have a high density of users. You're going to want to give, as it were, more than 100% coverage. And the way you do that is with non-overlapping frequencies, and you can do that. It's basically different channels within the same frequency band is the way it's typically done with LTE. And it's designed for that. It's designed for a very high density of cells if that's what you require to serve the customers you've got. So, if you had a lot of apartment blocks or something like that, you'd have to be looking at that kind of coverage. But then the sort of chain I've shown of radios, if you've got, back to my example of perhaps residential area of a town strung out along a road, you might want to do it with much less overlap. You don't want to go to either side because that's, perhaps that's just fields or waste ground or something like that. So you'd string it along like that. And of course, they don't have to link at all. You can just put, with a small cell, you can just put a single cell down just to cover a particular, a particular entity, a particular a factory or a business park or I can't think, or a campus of some kind. That would be perfectly possible. Okay, so this is, I've had to be rather general here. If you want to talk in more detail about network design guidelines, because we have more than this than I could show here, then perhaps contact me afterwards and we can talk about more specific cases. Now, so I hope this has given you some feeling of the type of projects which we think lend themselves to LTE, or the type of ways you can deploy. Just to fill that out a little bit, here's a couple of slides on the ways that we can help you to do that. To realize these kind of projects with WTL, with our Vivada range of products, I think I've made some of this clear. We're offering small cell radio access. We're not doing the macro cells. If you want that, you'd probably go to Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei, or somebody. We're saying take a different approach. Start with the smaller, low cost of ownership kind of model. You don't have to use satellite, although lots of our projects do. We have a single unified management system, billing system, provisioning system to pull all of this together. I've mentioned before, we're optimizing the backhaul. We have, so that this will work over any technology, including satellite. Once you get the traffic to the center, if you need to interconnect with somebody else, which you obviously will for the calls to go somewhere, then we have the full SBC, SS7, Camel, MAP, whatever, the abilities to interconnect with existing operators over IP or legacy systems. That's a big part of what we do. We have things like Wi-Fi hotspot support. There's a range of different service models. Not everybody will use everything, but we try to give people the options to put together a cost-effective service that's going to earn them a return. And we're all about the VoIP calling over these networks. We still believe there's an awful lot of revenue to be gained by giving reliable, high-quality voice services to, as well as the internet access and so forth that LTE implies. Okay. Now, I talked a little bit about this in the design slides, so I'm not gonna spend time on that right now. So the ROI considerations, you've got to get a return on investment, otherwise why are you doing it? There's no point having the technology if you haven't got some sight of when you're going to get your money back. I find it very hard to give a generalized case here, which is why I've not put numbers on here. I'm going to give you a particular example, and it will be applicable to some, but it will be completely not to others. So this was a case, it's kind of suburban Brazil, so it's not the major cities, it's smaller towns. The person was trying to do 16 sites initially, so not huge, but certainly not trivial. They were aiming, the towns had sort of tens of thousands or a bit less than 50,000 population, and the very modest target was to pick up 1,000 subscribers roughly in each town. And that's kind of cherry picking the sort of higher spending individuals and small businesses and government and education people like that. So the way the figures worked out there was that for each site they were spending around about $10,000, $10K. That included the radio aspect, the mast, or I mean, with LTE you don't necessarily need a great big mast like you do for GSM because you're covering a smaller area, so you can get away quite often with a pole or putting on the side of a building. So that helps. So it included the radio, the mast, the power, and this was coming in for about, it didn't include the cost of the site because of the reasons I just said. So that's coming in at about $10K per town. 16 sites, about 1,000 subscribers sorry, 16 towns, about 1,000 per town. At the center, the central kind of switching, the core for this, the billing, the provisioning, that was in the order of 150,000. Then a monthly OPEX, so you've got to backhaul that traffic, you've got termination costs, you've got staff costs, power. The monthly OPEX for that was around about $25,000, and that included amortization of the CapEx for buying all of the above. So what they were looking for on the revenue side here, and I think in one respect they've been quite conservative, was they were looking for $30 per customer per month for the kind of all-you-can-eat internet, the monthly charge, and that would include local voice as well. And on top of that, they were budgeting for $10 worth of kind of breakout calls. I think that's quite low, but you know, it's better to err on the side of caution, I guess. So you probably can't do all of that in your head, but what it works out at was a payback period of just over a year, so 13 months. And between us, we considered that was probably pretty healthy for a project of this scale, because obviously once they've done that, then you know things are only going to get better. The return just gets better from that point on. So we considered that, yeah, as I say, I think all concerned considered that to be pretty healthy. And so that it's it's things like that, and that sort of economic picture. Sometimes less. I mean, these people were starting relatively big. You know, they were looking for, you know, getting on for 20,000 subscribers more or less from day one. So that they could certainly have started smaller if they wished. And that's why we think that these LTE networks are within reach. We quite strongly believe this is a technology, by using small cells, using other smart bits of technology, why this is going to drive adoption and will genuinely help in sort of connecting the unconnected initiative. And that's why we're pushing so strongly. So I hope I've made the case for that. Just a couple of little bits just to position us, because I didn't really do that at the beginning. I didn't want to put you off right at the start. So we've been doing these kind of solutions for a number of years. As I suggested earlier, we are real veterans of the voice over IP world. This is some of our awards from the last year, so it's very nice to see that mostly from Africa, as you can see, where we spend a lot of our attention. And it's really been great to see the amount of recognition some of our projects are getting. So, and we actually have more awards than that, but this slide misses one or two of them there. This is just a graphic that illustrates some of our activities and some of our achievements there. As you see, the colored blue countries are where we have active deployments. I think it's even out of date a bit now. I think we have a couple more than when we prepared this. But yeah, so we're in more than 30 countries. We're doing many billions of minutes of traffic a year for people. As you see, millions of calls a day, and I think a growing list of rural projects as well to support the activities I've been talking about. So that's really what I wanted to say. I think we have one or two questions which we might be able to pick up now.
Perhaps it would be easiest.
Yep. Go on.
Well, sorry, I beg your pardon, Simon. I was just going to say perhaps it would be easiest if I were to read them out for you.
Okay. I had one thing to say, which is, if any of you are going to be in ITW in Chicago next week, I will be there, and I would be really happy to see you. We have a table there. Look us up. Come and see us if you're around. Okay.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Simon. That was great. The first question is, what is the impact of 5G on LTE? I guess that's rather hard to answer, but perhaps you can give us your perspective.
Well, yeah, I can. I think in the terms I've been talking about, and I've tried to address not the global market, but areas that are sort of currently not connected. This is going to sound a bit stupid, but I think it has almost no impact, because it's not as though LTE has stopped people wanting to use 2G in the sort of areas I'm talking about. I don't think 5G is in a position where it is going to be a viable option for the sort of markets and the sort of operators that I'm talking about. I think we are a couple of years away from that.
I can supplement that. I think you're absolutely right, Simon, and I think it definitely won't be a substitution effect when 5G comes along, which is still 2 or 3 years away. It's going to be focused in metro areas to start with, in all likelihood, and therefore at the edges of the network will be dependent on LTE just as we are on 2G in many cases today. Okay, a gentleman was going to ask about some use cases, so I hope that we've already addressed those, but do come back to us if not. The next question then from Pascal is, would you pair your solution with satellite connectivity to extend the reach? Is one part. Then there's a supplement to that, which is, partnering, or infrastructure as a service model. All three parts of which I think are very close to your heart, Simon.
No, they really are. Absolutely yes to the satellite question. That's actually how we got into this, was by applying our VoIP optimization compression techniques to mobile traffic being backhauled from remote base stations. So I think satellite is absolutely key to this sort of solution working.
Okay,
what's the second part?
It's about the infrastructure as a service aspect, or so I suppose do you partner in order to deliver this, or do you offer it as a service
Right.
in some cases?
We as WTL do not offer it as a service, but we have partners that do, and we do have partnerships in a couple of places which are kind of put together, or they're at least three-way, where there's a satellite partner for the backhaul, there's us for the equipment part, and then there's somebody else to manage the logistics and the running of it. So yeah, it's definitely a partnership model.
I guess you would say then, if someone were to want to pursue a partnership model, then you can help facilitate the partnership to deliver that.
Yeah, and it's something we're actively seeking to be involved in. So yes.
Okay. Now the next one is about billing and payment. The gentleman goes on to say, I'm assuming mobile payments are central, but given that rural areas often see less uptake of mobile payments, do airtime credits also work in some instances?
Yes, that's a great point. And it's, to be honest, it's something we're finding more about as we continue, as we go into different countries, because you know what it's like. There are places in East Africa which are really, really into mobile money and you know, are completely way ahead of more or less anywhere in the world on that sort of thing. And there we are doing integration with the existing payment systems like M-Pesa in Kenya and PayPal, things like that. So yes, we certainly get involved in that. The airtime credits type of thing, that's actually one of the reasons we kind of got into this money transfer angle. I think I made a brief mention of that. And the sort of picture there is the son in the city puts credit on his family's phone out in the village. You see what I mean? That kind of sort of using
passing on to revenue to relatives.
Yeah, and so using airtime credit as a means of transferring value around. Yeah.
Okay. We've got quite a number of questions now, so I'll just move on quickly to the. This is a technical one. At what channel width are we looking at those performance metrics? I assume that's referring to the slide where you have 64 active users.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, and my memory is going to fail me, but I think, isn't it 20 megahertz per channel? Is that right?
Ooh,
I might have gone bonkers, but it's the there's a standard LTE channel bandwidth. My memory says it's 20, but
maybe we can note that and then come back to Lawrence in due course.
Yeah, but it's the unit of currency of LTE is a channel, and that's what a channel of frequency equates to in bits per second.
So as per 3GPP rules.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What's your small cell coverage in terms of radius?
Okay. Well, as I think I put on one of the diagrams, typically 4 kilometers for an LTE small cell. A 2G cell is greater, of course, but yeah, for LTE we're typically seeing something like 4 kilometers.
Okay, and this question actually is coming from somebody from Intelsat actually, despite
Hmm.
the person listed here. So I guess someone is listening with somebody else. Okay, question here: what's your relationship with Vivada? Are they an MNO, and do they own spectrum?
Okay, I think this is a misconception. Vivada is the brand name of our of WTL's rural products. So I've seen this before. People believe Vivada is an operator in its own right. That's not so. It's just our name for our rural products. So wherever you've seen Vivada in this presentation, if you want, you can put WTL Rural Kit, and that's what it means, or Rural Solution.
It is in fact a portmanteau word that you have created, isn't it? A village, voice, and data. So.
It is. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, we made it up, meaning village, voice, and data. So it's the name for our product range.
Okay. There's one final question, which is also of a technical nature, and it says, have you already tested your solution on high throughput satellites using spot beams? And then goes on to add, do you foresee any challenges using HTS satellite instead of terrestrial solution to backhaul to rural areas?
I don't think we have tested with HTS. I'm trying to think. We did some testing with a Belgian satellite company a couple of weeks ago, and I'm not fully on top of what that used, so it could be. No, I don't see any particular challenges. As I think I mentioned earlier, our background for getting into this was voice over IP via satellite. A couple of years ago, we did a big project funded by the European Space Agency into voice over IP over VSAT, particularly for use around Africa. And that's one of the reasons, we come to be here today talking about these subjects, and having been deployed in 30 whatever countries on the continent. So yeah, I don't see a difficulty there. It is exactly what we are designed to achieve.
And I think just to add to that, it's fair to say that over the last 20 years or so, WTL has pretty much tracked evolution in satellite standards in order to enable its remote connectivity.
Exactly right. Yeah, you're right. What we started working over 20 years ago is probably, in disrepute, has fallen out of the sky by now. But yes, that's exactly so.
Okay, I think there are two final questions. What's the typical satellite backhaul bandwidth requirement? And that you'll like this one. How can we use small cell using unlicensed band in LTE? From two different people, of course, but they're both
okay. No, they are. The first question is a tricky one, because different service providers take different standpoints about how much contention they want their users to suffer. So we have delivered small cells with as little as, let's sort of think, as little as 256K of satellite bandwidth, and that's enough for 20 voice calls, 20 something voice calls, and you've still got some left over for internet browsing for, say, a cyber cafe or something like that. So we can operate right down at that minimal level thanks to the compression and stuff that we employ. On the other hand, you saw the sort of figures I was talking about earlier. It's much more likely for LTE that if you're bothering with LTE, you're bothering because you want to give a better experience. So you're definitely going to be having to look at the 100 meg down, 10 meg up kind of thing that I was showing. I don't think it makes sense to contend that. We would, again, depending on the design, I would expect you're probably going to share an individual satellite link between multiple E-node Bs, between multiple radios. So it would, depending on the density and how many you can get to a central point where the satellite dish is, I would be thinking between 3 and 10 base stations per satellite link, probably.
And then the next question is about unlicensed LTE, and that's our final question.
Okay, well, that is fascinating. I'd be interested to take that up offline. We are constrained by the frequencies that the radios currently support, and obviously the frequencies. They're typically not software controlled. If they're built for one frequency, they won't operate in another. So I would have to know the frequency in question. So yeah, we can't automatically support all frequencies, is what I would say.
Okay. Well, that's a clear answer, and of course, that's something that can be followed up individually after the event. Well, I think we have drawn to the end of our allotted time, Simon. Would you like to say a concluding remark or two before we wrap up and thank everyone?
No, I'm happy we've got such good questions. That's really gratifying. Thank you. I said come and see us next week if you're in Chicago. There are all sorts of other ways of contacting us, and I hope it's stirred some thoughts for people, that it makes you perhaps think of projects that are possible that you perhaps thought weren't possible before. That's really was my aim. So thanks for listening.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Simon, for all of those insights and for sharing them so eloquently. And thanks to all of you who have joined us this afternoon. I know it's asking a lot to take time out of your day. We do appreciate it, and we will follow up with you in due course. But thank you for attending, and thank you for staying throughout this hour, and indeed for the additional 4 hours. Okay, so with that, it's good afternoon from me, and
good afternoon from me. Thank you very much.
Okay.